I'm waiting for you, Tina.
We're live. So welcome everybody to the Council Committee on Finance, Wednesday, June 17, 2020. We're going to call this meeting to order. Madam Clerk, could you please call the roll call?
Chairman Iglesias.
Present.
Vice Chairwoman Ryan.
Present.
Councilwoman Castillo.
Present.
Councilwoman Anthony.
Present.
Councilman Taylor.
Here.
Present, we have a quorum.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Let the record reflect that President Sabina Matos is present. President Pro Tem Correa is present. Councilman Salvatore is present. The Internal Auditor Costa is present. Mr. Lottie, Treasurer, is present. Kenny Shaheen is present. I believe we have everybody at this time. Okay. So, I'll start the meeting like I always start it. I'd ask everybody that if you have the ability that when you want to speak, if you could then press the icon to raise your hand, I'll acknowledge you, and then you have an opportunity to speak. I ask everybody to be respectful of that process. If you don't have the ability to actually do the icon, or, press the icon to raise your hand, then try to raise your hand physically, and we'll get to you. I'm asking you to maintain the process, be respectful to each other, let everybody speak. And if they acknowledge, speak. Not acknowledge, you have to wait your turn to speak. All right? And that's the process. All right? So let's begin that. And then, Madam Clerk, item number 1.
We have the solicitor read.
Oh, yes. Mr. Solicitor, could you read the record why the City Council Committee on Finance has the ability to conduct this meeting through this internet Zoom process?
Certainly, Mr. Chair. Pursuant to Governor Gina Raimondo's executive order, whereby she suspended the Open Meetings Act requirement, this meeting is properly being held through the internet via Zoom in accordance with her executive order, where she suspended the OMA requirement.
Thank you, Mr. Chevron. As usual, we will govern this meeting per Robert's Rules of Order and the rules of the City Council, per what we are all ethically and legally obligated to do so. Let the record reflect that Councilman Pedro Espinal has joined the meeting.
So noted.
Thank you. All right, so, Madam Clerk, could we read item number 1 into the record, please?
Resolution authorizing the issuance of tax notes.
Thank you. So, I know we have folks from administration here, and of course, Ms. Grandy, the legal advisor, bond counsel, I should say. And Mr. Mancini, anybody else from administration going to speak on this matter? Anybody else?
No, Mr. Chairman, it could be myself, and Ms. Silveria will be joining us shortly. She's on a water supply board meeting, if necessary, and we're joined this evening by Karen Grandy of partner at Lock Lord LLP as bond counsel, and Mr. Adam Cray, who is a fiscal advisor for the city, and he is with Hilltop Securities.
Is
Mr. Craig is on.
Is he online?
He's on by telephone, sir.
Okay. Larry, can you tell me the last 3 numbers of his telephone?
Yes. Give me one second, please. Should be 0259.
What is his first name? Adam?
Yes. Adam Cray, K-R-E-A.
Mr.
Craig?
Mr. Craig, can you hear us, sir?
Yes, I can, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Great, thanks. Let's, why don't we swear in Mr. Mancini, Mr. Cray, and Ms. Grandy, and then we can hear the presentation by the administration. Madam Clerk.
Please raise your right hand.
Ms. Grandy, Mr. Craig, please raise your right hand. Do you swear under penalty of perjury that the testimony that you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
I do.
I do. I was trying to find you.
Mr.
Lawrence
Mancini?
J. Mancini, Chief Financial Officer, City of Providence.
Ms. Grandy?
Karen S.D. Grandy, partner at Lock Lord LLP, bond counsel to the city.
Mr. Craig?
Adam Cray, KREA, Hilltop Securities, financial advisor to the city.
Thank you. I was remiss to mention, by the way, to thank the clerk's office from last night's meeting and to once again thank the clerk's office for this evening's meeting because they are working under multiple hours. I think it's important to acknowledge them. The clerk, the entire unit has been working when at City Hall, putting numerous hours in, and of course, utilizing this system here, which clearly, by the way, has shown there's several kinks and several issues dealing with this type of process. So I want to commend the clerks, Mr. Clerk, Madam Clerk. You folks do a great job, and they sit here hour after hour, night after night, with all us council members and public members, and going through this process. So I want to take a point to thank you again, because we're not there yet. I think we're not even halfway home yet, but hopefully we'll get there. And hopefully we'll get back to some type of semblance of normalcy in the future.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Mancini, could you just give us a quick, give us a quick understanding of what's before us, what's being asked of the committee and the council, and then why? How's that? Want to try that?
So,
You have the mic, sir.
So, Mr. Chairman, members of the Finance Committee and members of the Council, good evening, and thank you again for the opportunity to appear before you, as always. So, Mr. Chairman, the matter before you is an instrument that was prepared with the assistance of your clerk's office via tool of the city solicitor and prepared and constructed by outside bond counsel, Ms. Grandy. If I may, Mr. Chairman, go back a bit. When we first began to engage in COVID-19 recovery conditions, you may recall that there was early discussions about the city's ability to sustain its present cash flow. And I thought then, as I do now, and with the collaboration of council and council affiliates, we have regularly measured cash flow, and we had exercised and expressed the, I think, the provision to have the ability to have a credit facility if need be. Thankfully, sir, up to this point, we have not had the need to be, but I think as we approach the final weeks of June and as we move into the early part of July, I think this conversation becomes more and more prominent and more prudent fiscally. With that said, Mr. Chairman, we were asked and tasked by both the council and the provisions of line of credit TANs borrowing. And for the benefit of those that are not familiar with those terms, that stands for tax anticipation notes. In Providence, one of the unique communities, and Ms. Grandy can give more attestation of that, Providence can borrow a TAN different than any other municipality in the state of Rhode Island. Providence can borrow a TAN with all the provisions of repayment, with the exception that it's treated like a line of credit. Once the dollar amount is established, the amount can be drawn, repaid, reborrowed, and then finally paid in full over the 12-month period necessary to extinguish the obligation. That has its benefit. It has its benefit in the use of cash flow, but it also has the conditions associated with market timing in terms of interest rates. If the interest rates are low when you first draw, they may rise later versus a fixed product. But I think Ms. Grandy and Ms. Craig can speak better to that. What we did is we just devised an 18-month cash flow. And the 18-month cash flow was meant to include the final 3 months of FY20, April, May, and June of this year, the 12 months ensuing thereafter for the budget year FY21, predicated mostly on the budget submitted by the Laws Administration, and then 3 months thereafter for the first 3 months of fiscal year 22, basically capturing 18 months of activity. And the difficulty with that, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, is that you're really making predictions predicated on what we know today and what the budget we turned in. And while much of that might change given what we learned later from the General Assembly and federal government, our strategy was to do so based on the knowledge we know. One of the things that we learned as in my capacity as CFO was that when you borrow on a line of credit basis, in order for it to be issued in the most tax-favored provision, known as tax exempt, there is a particular formula. Once you meet the credit limit in those calculations, the formula that you borrow under is take the deepest position of negative cash flow that you think you might be in, all things considered. And may I say, Mr. Chairman, some of that is strategically employed. For example, I don't know if I'll collect the same efficiency of taxes in the month of July as I might ordinarily, because folks may still be coming off of the hardship and they may pay slower, but they will pay. I don't know if I'm going to receive the traditional pilot money that I get in July, because the General Assembly for the FY21 budget will only be convening sometime in July, and they may not know their decision yet as it pertains to all state revenue pass-throughs. And so with those things in mind, the Finance Department developed basically a worst-case scenario. What would it be like if that didn't happen? If taxes were traditionally $20 million slower in July than they normally would, but played catch-up in August and September. If we didn't get the pilot money, it's not in July, but we got it in August, and so on and so forth. If we paid off the entire balance due on the pension payment for FY20, approximately $30 million in July, and then there was this consideration, and we had this conversation, Mr. Chairman, not too long ago when we had our pension advisor and our investment advisor on whether or not we would or would not contemplate a budgetary savings by making the full pension payment. With all that said and all that included, we got to the deepest part of our cash flow at about, again, this is for strategic planning purposes, approximately $72 million. These are intentional decisions that would land us at that number. And based on the rules of tax-exempt financing, we could add an additional 5% of the budget. On a $500 million budget, that's $25 million more. When we did that, we arrived at the maximum capacity that we thought at ever we could borrow, which would be $94,725,000. And Mr. Chairman, I had this discussion regularly, and I also had it again today with the internal auditor. She and I shared both information, and she shared some additional knowledge with me today, which I really appreciate her doing so. We're not saying that we're borrowing $94 million or $90 million or $60 million, but one of the questions the internal auditor asked, which I thought was a very good question, what happens if we borrow X, if we authorize X dollar amount, then later we determine we need a higher amount? And the reason why I say this is that we don't know that. But if you started out as an example with $30 million, just for comfort's sake, and I want to go back to the Treasurer's remarks early on, we were never planning to borrow, and I believe we will never plan to borrow to balance a budget. This is to assist with the temporary delay of cash flow, to give us the privilege and the comfort of knowing that we can honor our obligations, including those that trigger default conditions, such as the non-payment of debt service or wages, at a time when the money will arrive, but it will arrive slower, or a planned delay because of third-party payments, such as payments to us by the state or federal government. With that said, it does not obligate us any greater than the amount that we would draw, remember, on this line of credit TANS financing. So if we authorize with the council approval, which requires the signature of both the mayor and the treasurer, the maximum authority to borrow, then we can only take what we believe is be appropriate, when we believe it's appropriate, by the authority granted by the council, with the sign-off of the treasurer and the finance director, having met and planned cash daily or weekly and said, this week looks like taxes are slower, we might need to draw $10 million to meet payroll and debt service. After a discussion and some exchange of information between Treasury and Finance, those two legally chartered parties by charter would authorize the draw of that $10 million, let's say, and so on and so forth, but never without either one, and never without that provision in place. And we have repeatedly had this discussion, both by advising counsel and by having this discussion in public meeting. So with that said, that's the reason why we got to the highest amount. And while there may be concern on the part of the council, and I do understand that, I'm not taking this in a full granted position, that was the maximum intent. Yes, at one time the administration was proposing a development of an idea that thought we could have a budget save if we made the entire pension payment early. It's a discussion that we've had for a number of years, and this was the one time that by being able to strategically deploy the cash flow position that we could probably do it. on further consideration, if the council has expressed their concern, and we have, in fact, heard that concern and listened to it, I think now we're at a premise where the cash flow would be primarily for the ability to meet our obligations in a timely fashion with the ability to repay that cash flow and have no other provision for it. So with that, I would leave that discussion further, Mr. Chairman, to you as chair and members of our committee, and certainly the council advisors and myself to have that discussion both this evening and as we go forward. I think we can be collaborative on that. It's my obligation to all of you to give you that comfort and to make sure that collaboratively we have worked to endeavor that we have sustained the right tools to give the city the comfort that we need to know that we will have the ability to meet our obligations. And again, I want to be clear, this is not to balance a budget. This is not to, so to speak, plug a budget hole. We're not borrowing to make up money. We're borrowing to assist ourselves with the ability to pay our obligations until those revenues that we believe will arrive may arrive later. And so with that, that runs pretty much the premise behind why we are planning this original idea of having the line of credit. I have Ms. Grandy in her capacity as bond counsel, Mr. Cray in his capacity as fiscal and financial advisor, here to answer any questions that I may not be able to answer, either in the legal tactic or any financial pricing methodologies and how that would all work, including the timing of this, the length of time it would take to secure this, even after we procured legislative approval here at the City Council, and so forth. So with that, if there are further questions of myself, I certainly welcome, Mr. Chairman, but thank you for that opportunity to give you at least the catch up on this information.
Thank you. Councilman Taylor, Chief Taylor?
Thank you, Chairman. Okay, so 20 minutes that was. What exactly are we looking to borrow? Because I heard about 5 numbers in there. So I heard 94 is the maximum, 72 million, and I heard 30 million, and some others too. But
so 94 is the maximum, and then the amount that we would need to borrow, Mr. Councilman, would be predicated on the comfort level of council, predicated on information that we have commonly shared on where we think we would be. I don't think there is a set number. The original discussion that I had with the council was predicated on making a single payment to the pension plan. If that's not the preference of the council, then that number need not be considered this evening. And what you might want to consider, based on advice of Treasury and internal auditor, what you believe has become the number that would be satisfactory. I think we've heard from the very beginning, and I think the treasurer, I would ask that he would comment on this. I think we heard from the beginning a range between 30 million and 60 million, depending upon, and here's why it's 30 million. We don't know when the pilot money will be arriving. Could be arriving, if it does arrive in the amount that was expected, somewhere between 31 and 33 million, it could be as late as sometime in August. So typically received in July, and when received, typically in the last several years, used in its entirety to pay the final installment of that current year's pension payment. So if we got it in July, we were actually paying off the balance on the city's 100% pension payment that was due at or by June 30th. So I would say, notwithstanding our discussion 2 or 3 weeks ago about one single payment for the new pension payment because of concerns about market timing of deposit with the trustee, where they could be at risk, while I understand that as well, we've had this discussion. We're still having the payment is still tied to an 8% assumed rate of return. So with all that said, I would probably guess at minimum a $30 million credit amount to somewhere and double that to 60 million. But I want to be clear, the one number that you did hear me say was the maximum amount that we could borrow based on a cash flow that was prepared now a month ago would be 94 million and some change. That's the max. You do not get charged on that until you begin to draw what you believe you would draw. And drawing that money is strategically employed by the authority of the treasurer and the finance director only, once that has been granted. So I would leave that, Mr. Councilman Taylor, I would leave that for this discussion. I don't have a set amount today. I think 30 million would be minimum.
Is there any money still left in the rainy day fund? And I know that can't be for the budget, but is there going to be money left in the rainy day fund?
We have not touched the rainy day fund as yet.
How much is in the rainy day? How much?
10.5 million in the rainy day bank account.
Okay, and if we borrow this money, we are paying it back as we get it, or say if we borrow, let's say, I'm just throwing it out there, we borrow it today, June 17th. Are we paying it back by June 17, 2021, or as we go
That's it.
along? Or as we
Nope.
go, if we have the money, are we going to pay it?
Absolutely. The prudent thing to do is to pay it when we can, which is as early as we can. But the legal maximum is 1 year from the date you begin your first draw.
And how much money are we going to? Okay, so I know you say put it in the stock market. So let's say,
No,
as
no.
far as
No,
the pension.
No, we're not putting it in the stock market.
No, we're
What
paying
we
the
were going to
pension.
do, what we had under consideration was to make a single deposit for the new year pension payment, because that would have generated a pension savings at that time of 5.6 million, less the interest cost to borrow that amount of money and paying it off over 12 months. Probably the net savings would be about 4 million. The internal auditor, the treasurer, and I have had recent discussions, including one today, that if we could style pension payments on a more calculated, even monthly basis. That's always a challenge because our cash doesn't arrive on an even month basis to meet our monthly obligations. For example, our housing aid comes in a small piece in October, then a large piece in March. That piece in March is used to extinguish all of our debt service, theoretically. There are some peaks and valleys in cash flow, so we can't always and have not always made identical monthly installments on the pension payment. The reason why there's always been 28 to 30 some $million remaining at the end of June to try to get that payment fully paid, and we use the pilot money, although that money will come in sometime in post-July of the 20 year. It's the state's 21 budget, but that money belongs back in the old year to the city, and we use the pilot money to make the pension payment, that last installment. I don't think tonight that the council has been advised that we would do a single New Year pension contribution, but at this juncture, I'm saying 30 million, and that's as close as accurate as I can get to what I think we would need for comfort. That doesn't mean I'm going to draw 30 million today. It might mean draw 10 million to meet two pay periods in the month of July if the cash wasn't sufficient. My latest cash flow projection file with the internal audit on Monday, as is due each month, demonstrates that we probably could be around 10 million in cash at June 30 without making an appropriation to the school department. I have already put the school department on notice that their cash will be delayed till sometime in July, or when tax revenue is received, or when state and federal revenue is received. This was not something that was unplanned. We had discussions about this with the school department, and it has occurred in prior years as well. Their cash is sufficient to carry them into July. Ours will be, and that gets us at least until July to meet, minimally, the next pay period in July, July 10th, and any debt service that would be due by around July 15th for safety's sake. And at that point, with the ability to get the tax levy out of committee, I trust next week, and with proper first and second council passage and tax bills being placed in the mail, we will probably see the revenue from taxes begin to flow in sometime in the first and second week of July. I think if the bills go out that day after the adoption on June 30th, received in the mail 2 days later, July 2nd. July 3rd is a Friday. That's probably the observation of a holiday for the July 4th weekend. We may not see a preponderance of tax payments till the second week of July. That's probably the major concern today that I and maybe Treasury and the internal audit would share with you, that might be a cash crunch. So that's one discussion. There is certainly another discussion associated with the use of the rainy day fund. The treasurer and I had a discussion just last Friday that we thought by proper means, by a resolution or ordinance that will require the removal from that fund when necessary, if necessary, with replenishment as soon as the cash arrives from the New Year taxes to replace it. We have no intention of draining the rainy day fund. In fact, from my perspective, Councilman, you've heard me say this on a number of occasions, I think that for me, that would be the last resort of all resorts. I would rather take it on a line of credit before I would take it from a bank account, simply because of the fiscal discipline that I think is important in that regard. However, if that's the alternative that we had, and we had to consider that, buying between Treasury and Finance, we would certainly take that under advisement, and we would take that with the proper instrument that the council would approve. But back to your question, the maximum amount that we could borrow, based on a cash flow that was predicated on pivot, a certain dollar amount of money received here or a certain payment there, we believe would have been $94 million. That amount can change downward. That's the max. You do not have to take it. You are not charged on the amount that you do not take, only on the amount that you do borrow. And when you do pay it back, it reduces the amount that you would pay on the amount you continue to carry until it's fully liquidated. And again, it's 12 months to pay it off, and that's the provision of that. So I can have Mr. Cray or Ms. Grandy give you additional information with respect to how that works. But as to the dollar amount, with due respect, I give that deference to council leadership and council members, as well as finance committee and finance advisors.
Okay, so, I mean, the problem that I have borrowing a dollar is that I'd like to see a plan A, plan B, and a plan C from the administration. The reason I say this is because I have been watching the state. The state's about anywhere from 700 to 900 million. They're in the hole. So we're banking on, say, July, August of getting and correct me, I could be wrong, the $33 million. What happens July? I mean, my concern is in July and August, if we don't get the $33 million from the state, I don't want to vote on something where we're going to be borrowing money. And then come September, October, the administration comes back to the council and says, we're going to do a supplemental budget. We have to raise taxes. I don't want to even address that. So I don't know what plan that we have. I mean, I understand you're explaining it to me. But my concern is that if we don't, obviously we're about $2.5 million short this year from last year from the funds that are coming in from the beverage tax and the ticketing and everything else. Hopefully that will start going back up in July. Hopefully, if we don't have a Florida, they close down again and then we end up in trouble. So there's a lot of ifs out there. And my concern is voting on taking out, $30 million. Let's say we agree on 30 million. Then September comes, we don't get the 33 million from the state. So we're already 3 million in the hole. So, I don't know. I'm very leery on this because I'm very leery because here's the reason I'm leery is because when these people come forward to us, these directors and even the administration, they couldn't answer any of our questions from furlough days to whatever we have. And I feel that we're kicking the can down the road because I don't know. I mean, to my knowledge, we're still paying the temps, which I don't know why we're paying the temps. I mean, you want us to borrow money and we pay, we're going to borrow money, but, we got one of the things I took out, the fire chief's pay, because for $176,000 we've been paying for 5 years. I don't know where that $888,000 is, $880. We don't have a fire chief. So I'm very concerned that the administration does not give us answers, but they want us to borrow money. And then, like I said, if that 33 million doesn't come from the state, we're in trouble.
So, Councilman, I do hear your concerns, and I'm mindful of that, as I am of other council members. My point to you would be that a credit facility cannot be done overnight. It will take the action of government. The chairman had asked at one time that it be done by ordinance, while the law permits it to be done by resolution, which is single passage. Ordinance is dual passage. If you choose to take it by ordinance, that's dual passage. Then from there, Ms. Grandy will attest, I'm sure, that just to put the transaction together for any dollar amount, $1 or dollar whatever, will take minimally 2 weeks to put together. And then we have to identify who the lender and funder would be, whether it be our existing financial institution, which the treasurer has already initiated some discussion with, and they have provided a list of questions that administration is working to complete, or some other competitive funder or lender. My concern today is that we may be not looking at drawing one penny minimally for 3 to 4 weeks, if that's the case. With that said, even if you all found comfort at 30 million, I can assure you that we're not drawing 30 million unless there was an immediate need. The treasurer and the finance director has to make that decision, not the mayor, not the CFO. Treasury would sit with finance and say, what do we need today to comfort that we can meet payroll and debt service only, nothing else? And we have to meet those obligations. If we did not have cash arriving as is expected on the tax budget. Let me go back to one thing. The highest collection of taxes is the first quarter. Partly due to, there are many people who want to get rid of the bill right away. They pay early. There are some mortgage companies that use escrow. They want to pay in full because they're holding funds. But it probably tends to be, rather than even 25% on 4 quarters, it tends to be closer to 30, 33% of collection, somewhere between 80 and 100 million. I want to just fast forward in the fourth quarter. The fourth quarter of this year was expected to be a significant delay. We thought at one time we would see $10 million less in fourth quarter collections, mostly due to the hardship, people unemployed, and also because we allowed grace to make payment through June 30. I'm pleased to say that through Monday, June 15th, with 2 full weeks to go in tax collection, and there is acceleration. People do pay as that new deadline draws near. We are within $4 million of every penny that we were expected to collect. We have 99% of the tax levy collected already year to date. In my opinion, that is astounding compared to the conditions associated with the fourth quarter this year. So as conditions, I hope, will improve as we move into the first quarter. If at least that happens, if we're only 1% off by that quarter, that might be what we may not see in July, but we might see it by the time we get to August and September, the end of the first quarter. So taxes, again, is 70% of the city's revenue. Yes, we're dependent upon state pass-through funds and pilot and other activities. There has been discussions that has been shared with administration, myself, that there were solutions at hand that would hopefully make the city held harmless, I believe, and that the pilot money would in fact be received. And while I can't assure that to you, because I can't assure that to myself, they were very positive discussions, and I'm hoping that we will see that once they return to the General Assembly, which will not yet occur for FY21 until sometime in July. While they're meeting this week to do the supplemental budget, there will be no discussion of the 21 budget until sometime in July. That we did not know 2 months ago when this discussion first began. We all believed that, by some time we get to the beginning of June, the General Assembly might even consider the FY21 budget. That was simply a premise on our part that seemed reasonable. As the months began to click off and the weeks went by, and we learned lately that, yes, they will meet in June, but only to do the supplemental for the state budget of 20. The 21 budget, they're still waiting to see what federal money might come through in a new round of CARES Act. So, again, a delay, but this is meant to give, I think, city officials, including council advisors, whatever level of comfort if they had to meet payroll or pay debt service. In my view, the two most significant conditions of obligation, because they both carry default conditions. If you don't pay your debt service, it's a default condition. That could never happen. If you don't pay wages, that's a default condition. And while pension payments can be spread out and paid anytime prior to June 30, or if not thereafter with some interest, it's not as much of a pressure as debt service and wages, two highest obligations. And so with that, what does that look like? There is no debt service due in August, thank God, and there is only $1.2 million due in debt service in the month of July, because we've already handled early payments in July, in June. The next round of debt service would occur in September. What will occur, though, is approximately $5 million every 2 weeks in payroll costs associated with that. And so in July, the two payroll dates are July 10th and July 24th, those 2 dates. Certainly by July 24th, coincidentally, the due date of July taxes, even if we allow to the end of the month to collect without an interest application. By the month of July, there's no doubt in my mind that we would see clearly 75 million to 80 million in tax collections on what ordinarily could be between 80 and 90 million. I'm confident of that. And so with that, I think we won't even have the need for this line of credit, not even have it, if we are able to skillfully get through the month of June, get a levy out of committee, get tax bills in the mail, and tax bills respond. It's just that what if we don't? And I think that puts us at risk to say we need that cash. It may be that we're doing this exercise for the right reason and may never have to take it at all, whether it's the first quarter or possibly later in the year. And to me, that would be the more beneficial position, and we will be in good space if that happened. But I think for the comfort of everybody, we would rather not plan for that situation. We'd rather be able to have that position. Again, if you set 30 million as the max, there's no discussion that says they're going to draw even one penny. That's a discussion that occurs when the need arises, and only if the treasurer and the finance director agree that a draw must take place. And once again, we will do everything to ensure to the council and administration that we're not drawing money to fill a budget hole. And I know what you're saying, Councilman, that we don't know what's going to happen with the state money, so therefore there may need to be reductions in the budget somewhere. I agree. And they will occur. They will have to occur. I believe the administration, certainly I, and administration senior officials have already discussed that's what's going to happen. If there is a reduction in anticipated revenues, then there'll be a comparable reduction in budgetary expenses.
So you said 75 to 80 million by the end of July?
I'm just giving it from my history and recollection of what comes in the month of July. July is one of the largest months. If July gets billed promptly in proper billing time, and that would have been bills in the mail by the 24th of June to give a full 30 days of seasoning, you could see around 80 million in the month of July, yes. Now with the delay, because the bills probably won't be in the mail till June 30th, the day after what's expected to be second passage, and that happens to be the week that the 4th of July falls on a Friday. With due respect, many people are not opening mail on a weekend when they're taking some privilege of July 4th vacation. So there could be a further delay of payment, human behavior, if you will. And so with that said, that might affect a lag in payment, but not a non-payment. I want to be clear about that. We're talking about a lag in payment, but not non-payment.
What
And
about,
that's evidenced by the 4th.
last question, Chairman, then I'll pass it on to someone else. As we saw with all the riots that we had downtown, and Councilman Salvatore brought out about the Rhode Island statute law that we possibly might have to pay 75% of the vandalism. Do we have an idea if that's going to happen, or do we have a figure? Are we figuring anywhere in there that's got to come out of claims and everything? So are we figuring anything on that?
I have not as yet, and I haven't had opportunity to discuss that matter with the law department to see what exposure or liability that the city would be in, and that's a discussion, Councilman, at a different level. But mindful of what you're saying,
but it's still that's money that, if it, depending on what it is, I don't know what it's going to be. It might not be nothing, but if it is, right, we're not figuring that in there, because the 10,000 that we paid for the violations, we didn't figure that in there. We had to pay it out, which was an error.
It is not included in the proposed budget that's before this committee. So no, but is it a discussion that will ensue before any appropriation is adopted by the council? I'm certain that discussion will be held by this committee and by members of the administration, no doubt. But it is not presently in the.
Let's hypothetically say it comes in and they say we owe $50,000. Where are we going to get that money from?
If it's demanded upon us by a court action and a court decision, then we have no choice. We'll have to find that money. Again, it would mean some strategic redeployment of an expenditure that was expected to be paid for something that may have been not essential but was considered to be a planned activity, would have to be forfeited in lieu of the money that would be needed to pay a demanded upon court action.
Okay. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Chief Councilman Taylor. Next, we have the Treasurer. We have, of course, the President, then Councilwoman Anthony, and Councilman Salvatore. Treasurer, you have the mic.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I just want to make a number of statements. Some may apply, some may not. And why I say that is because there's a whole bunch of things going on here. And I just want to address all of them. And we'll get, if you want to get into debate later on about specifics, of course, we can do that. Let me start off by saying borrowing to pay the pension system does not make sense. Borrowing more than we need does not make sense. I believe that we need to substantially cut the budget going into this situation. And if all of the money that we project to come in comes in, we can address that mid-year, or we can take up the budget again, or you can. I recommend that we do this by ordinance. So if we're going to borrow by ordinance. So based on the administration's cash flow, if you were to take out the borrowing itself, the lowest point we would get to would be $8 million. And that's more than enough to not borrow. But I believe that's a little too optimistic. And as things change, I think we're going to see less revenues come in. So I do believe that we need to borrow. The number 30 million was thrown out there. I would be comfortable with a line of credit of up to 30 million with my signature being on there and the finance director to authorize any drawdown. I would also ask that the ordinance itself require that any state funds that come in, pilot, etc., used to pay down the borrowing. So the only reason we should be borrowing would be from not receiving revenues that we expect. And that would generally be from the state of Rhode Island. I think that would be the only place. There could be some delays in tax payments from people, but I don't know if we would need to borrow because of that. I don't know if that would be substantial enough. Now, what I'm concerned about in that situation, where if we did not pay the bond down and we did not make cuts, the council would be forced next year to borrow again, and we'd be in an endless cycle. So if we force payments from the state to pay down the borrowing, at the end of the year, it should be zero, and we should have a balanced budget. If we, and again, I know that we're not looking at this, but if we were to borrow the money to pay the pension system and it would generate $5 million, next year we would have to make up that $5 million to have a balanced budget equal to this year. So I am very concerned about that. I believe that borrowing should only be done in emergencies, and that borrowing should only be used to supplement cash flow and not deficits. I think if we borrow more than we need, we're not going to make the hard decisions to cut the budget. And I think that's an absolute necessity, because if we don't do it this year, it's going to pop up next year. And I have to be honest with you, I think next year is going to be more difficult than this year. In regards to savings, I know that the auditor prepared a cash flow showing monthly payments to the pension system. I know that we won't be able to make all of them, but if we go on a more routine basis, as we have in the past, to make payments, we could see some savings there. And I'm available for any questions if anybody has any. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Right, why don't we go, let's go finish the tree of hands up first. President Matos.
So my question is in regards to the borrowing. I just would like to know how much is it going to cost us to borrow money? And if we borrow this time, let's say 20 million, 30 million, how much does that cost? Is there a difference if we borrow more than that right now? And how much would be the cost if we borrow only the 20 or the 30 million and then we decide to borrow again? Thank you.
So, Madam President, Mr. Chair, if you don't mind me answering, and Mr. Craig could give a more accurate, up-to-the-minute reflection of market trends, but no different than any other borrowing, Madam President and members of the committee, would be predicated on the interest rate that would be applied. And if we're borrowing on a line of credit that is not fixed but variable for whatever reason, that could be a benefit. It could be more expensive if it's variable because the rates could bounce back and forth. Given the current low interest environment, perhaps not. But it's based on interest, and whatever that rate applied against the outstanding use of that particular line of credit. If it was approved at 30 million and the city only drew 10 million and paid that 10 million back in 6 months, properly so, then you would be paying interest on 10 million for 6 months. If the rate was 4%, in effect, you'd be paying 2% on 10 million, or approximately $200,000 in interest, based on that quick example. Mr. Cray, are you able to add to that conversation? If I may, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Cray?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, Madam President, that is a good question. And at this point, unless Treasurer Lombardi knows more at this point than I do, I'm not sure we've had an indication from the bank or folks that we're talking to about what the rate would be. But as Chief Mancini said, the formula will be consistent. So whether you draw down 20 million or draw down 30 million or 25 million, the interest rate, you won't have to pay a higher rate because you're borrowing more or borrowing less. That will all be negotiated at the beginning. As Chief Mancini said, the line of credit is floating rate, so how it's priced based off the index will be agreed to at the beginning.
Can I just follow up, Mr. Chairman?
Madam President?
So I think maybe I have to rephrase my question. Is there a fee for doing the borrowing? Is there like when you do a refinance of the mortgage, is there a closing fee? Is there a standard fee associated with this or not?
Mr. Chairman, would you like me to answer that?
Yes, please. You, Mr. Mancini, and just
I would-
further clarification. Also, is there a repetitive fee, which means there may be a standard fee, and then it's $30 million. You take out 5, pay a fee. You pay that 5 back. You take out another 10. There's a fee. If there is, can you please explain the fee structure in total?
Yes. Yes, that's a very good question. So there are a couple of different fees involved. So I think what is all understood is when you do draw a certain amount, you're paying interest on that. In addition, there will most likely be what is called an undrawn fee, which means if at any one time you're only using 10 million of, let's say, the total of 30 million that you're authorized, because the bank has to reserve and keep up to 30 million available, there will be a fee on the amount you're not using, or there most likely will be a fee. That's pretty standard. And then, of course, when you do the transaction, there will be some legal fees and financial advisor fees. And then finally, each time you do a draw, and this is one more reason why you only take down and pay back when it makes the most sense, there does have to be tax paperwork filed every time there's a draw. So there will be a fee for the work that is done for the tax filings each time you take down a set amount of money.
Do we presently know what that proposed fee structure could be? Do we have any type of maybe anecdotal, or right now we won't know until if we would actually go out to, to the market? And I guess Ms. Grandy or Mr. Cray or Mr. Mancini, could you help us with that?
I defer to Mr. Craig.
Mr. Chairman, yeah, I can speak first. To be totally honest with you, I do not know what the bank is going to propose for that interest rate or for the undrawn fee. That's something that we'll learn as we work with them when the timing is appropriate to do so upon your direction. As far as the other fees, I know Ms. Grandy has recently worked on another one similar to this. I think, Karen, I don't know if you have examples of in your history of what the paperwork and the fees are for each tranche.
Yes, actually. This is a program that we actually drafted up for the state a couple of months ago. And in that case, we were dealing with the Disaster Emergency Funding Board, a bunch of constitutional issues. So it was not exactly cheap. But now that all the kinks are worked out of it, and assuming that we could get a bank to work with the same documentation that we've already prepared, probably the legal fees, including bank counsel and bond counsel, and there may be a trustees counsel as well, the paying agent. I'm imagining would probably be somewhere cumulatively around maybe 70-ish for all of those put together. With respect to the ongoing fees that Adam was talking about, putting aside the interest payable and the undrawn fee, basically, if you do this on a tax exempt basis, then every time you make a draw, the bank requires another opinion of bond counsel and a bring down tax certificate, and we're charging the state $4,000 for that. And so we recommended not to do draws very often. So it's not a large sum of money, but there is some tax work and an opinion to be rendered each time there's a draw. And I think the state's financial advisor may charge something in connection with that as well.
Ms. Grandy and Mr. Craig, could you possibly forward to the internal order, like you stated numerous fees, just could you put it in writing and forward to the internal order for further review? Madam President, do you have the mic? Do you have any further questions?
No, I would like to see probably and the schedule of the proposed fees. That would be really helpful. So I don't know if that's something that the internal auditor and the treasurer can get, so we have an idea.
Internal Auditor, Treasurer, folks, can you accommodate Madam President's request?
Absolutely.
Yes, sir.
Randy or Craig? Okay.
Thank you.
Madam President, any more questions at this time?
I'm all set for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam President. Next, we have Councilwoman Anthony.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question is to Mr. Mancini. I know you just said it, but I'm sorry I didn't hear it. Can you tell me who needs to authorize the disbursements?
So if I'm accurate on this, from Ms. Grandy's knowledge, and in order to engage the transaction to begin with, requires the signature of the mayor and the city treasurer.
Okay.
Then, once engaged, in order to draw, each draw must be approved by the city treasurer and the finance director.
Correct. Okay. Thank you. And then I was just wondering if you had a response to the treasurer's position about doing this by ordinance.
I have no objection.
Thank you.
The reason why the resolution was offered, because the law permits that, and at the time that we were contemplating it, it was meant to do it, if need be, in a single passage, if time was of the essence. But I have no objection to ordinance, none whatsoever.
Thank you. That's all I have.
You're welcome.
Thank you. I'll set Councilwoman Anthony.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Councilman Salvatore. You have the mic, sir.
Thank you, Chairman. Chief, thank you for your presentation. So in lieu of executing TANs and rating the very small amount of funding in the rainy day accounts, can you speak to other options that the council should consider? And if that includes cutting the budget, in your estimate, how much would the council be looking at in terms of slashing departmental operational costs?
So this is just broad-based, Councilman Salvatore, and thank you for the question. In lieu of any financing opportunities to provide for cash flow until cash flow can sustain itself. And again, I want to go back to the treasurer's remarks, and I fully agree with the treasurer that this was not intended ever. While it may have been thought of to be a methodology to get a savings by making the pension payment in full, and we've had that discussion on multiple occasions, this was never intended to be a device to balance the budget. It's meant to give cash flow when needed, if needed, at the time that it wasn't available, but would be available thereafter. That's a separate discussion in any climate, in any economy. But when that discussion is mixed in with the current conditions caused by the pandemic coronavirus and the uncertainty of revenue that we are dependent upon, that we do not yet know whether it will be there in total or some reduced amount, Councilman, that takes on a whole different discussion. As it is, if I may, and Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry if I have to just broaden this discussion a bit beyond line of credit financing. If I may, as it turns out now, we are positioning ourselves for a public hearing on Monday, the 22nd. If all goes well and the public hearing can be completed, and if the meeting upon the rise can be held, that meeting upon the rise is meant to determine the ability to move the levy out of committee. The tax bills have already been styled. The accounts receivable have already been calculated. There is no tax rate change. There is no tax increase on the consistency of last year's value. With that said, the bills will be ready to go and will be printed as follows while we await first and second passage and the seasoning of the 48-hour public notice. With that said, we do know this here. We met our obligation under the law, both home rule charter and state statute, to get a levy adopted and bills in the mail. What we all know is that when we can't make a determination on appropriation, we will work off of what is known as continuing authority. We have the ability, by both state statute and home rule charter, to work off that continuing authority, which basically says we cannot spend any more, but level or less, in the review by monthly budgeting of the, if you will, of the appropriation. The ones that rise to the top are the same reasons that rise to the conditions associated with default. What we must honor, as it stands, are wages and any attendant wage provisions, debt service. As to everything else, unless it is highly essential, then that becomes a decision of the administration working together with the council until we know certain what those other revenues that we're dependent upon, mostly state, what they are, when they will be provided or appropriated, and when we receive them. Until then, we will be working off a series of what I would call mini budgets. A budget for the month of July, a budget for the month of August, a budget for the month of September. I've had this discussion with council advisors, including Treasurer Lombardi and Internal Auditor Costa. I've shared that with the committee, and I've shared that with Chairman Igliozzi, that that would be the prudent thing to do, and that all things, unless it rises to a serious, essential matter, and that will be defined by what we do together, we'll continue to measure and monitor cash accordingly until we know for sure what that looks like. So the continuing authority and continuing appropriation becomes very important in this regard. And quite frankly, because the budget's only changed by $800,000 or so year over year, that's an important consideration. Let me explain a bit further. If this new budget that was proposed and submitted to the council by Mayor Loza had increased by some $10 million, and there was essentials in there, whatever they were, then working off of continuing authority would be much more dramatic because you'd have to find the gap way of making up that $10 million change within the appropriation of the prior year with still a great deal of uncertainty. The fact that the two budgets by year of separation have only changed by $872,000 in total, despite that there may be changes in detail, $872,000 in total, in a year where we've seen about $1.2 million, $1.4 million in new tax revenue, not associated with tax rate increase, but with new revenue, permits that have come on board or buildings that were completed. I think that puts us in safe regard to working off what's known as continuing authority. So to your question, Councilman Salvatore, while those plans have not been developed with detail, those plans have already been discussed with the administration. I've had those discussions. I've shared that with council leadership and with council affiliates and council advisors. And I do think we're ready and positioned to do just that as the days fall off the calendar here in June and as we move into the new fiscal year.
Thank you, Chief. My final question is, has anybody from the administration, including yourself, had this conversation with the state's Auditor General?
We have. As a matter of fact, Councilman, you may not have been participating in one of the meetings where I had this discussion. And I have to, Mr. Chairman, if you don't mind me saying so, this is an important question, so the answer requires a good answer.
Yes, please.
Thank you. Councilman Salvatore, we have met with state regulatory officials, now going into our sixth consecutive year, at a time when it was required because short of Budget Commission, the individuals that we meet with, the Auditor General, Mr. Hoyle, the Director of the Division of Municipal Finance, which at one time was Suzanne Gresham, now Steve Coleman, and by virtue of the title, the Director of Department of Revenue, Mark Ficolo, and his predecessors, as a accommodation of sorts between the state and the city when our finances were in a deficit position at the beginning of this administration when they first came into office. There was an agreement that we would meet monthly with those officials to share all knowledge that's shared regularly with city council affiliates, whether it's cash flow, operating reports, discussions on how you're doing with pension payments, how do the taxes look like, all those things that are critically important to the information that we share regularly, but for the benefit of state officials. When we came out of deficit position 3 years earlier than predicted, which was 4 years ago, while those meetings could have ended, I'm proud to say that at the request of the administration, myself included in particular, thought best, why not continue them? They've produced outstanding goodwill and trust, and they're helpful because the state officials get a better understanding of Providence's finance while we're still in a delicate recovery. I've said that and used that expression for many years. While we've returned to a surplus position, it's still a delicate recovery. There are many things that just still cause us concern, certainly the pension obligation and thereat. So we continue those meetings. I'm proud to say nearly 5 and some years have passed. Every month, other than by scheduled conflict, we meet with Auditor General, Director of the Division of Municipal Finance, Director of the Department of Revenue, and their staffs in meetings that last between an hour and 2 hours and share everything, and their questions. And yes, Auditor General Hoyle is aware of our original concerns about the line of credit, what we might do. He did ask at one time if your line of credit is sized properly, would you consider using it time being to complete your pension obligation for the current year while you await the pilot money? And we said we would if it worked in our favor. Yes, we would. Basically giving him assurance that that should be one of the things that we would consider. But all things, that was certainly over the past month or so, some of this dialogue has changed, but I want to be clear that we have an outstanding relationship with state officials in the sharing and reporting of information, and we have reported this entire conversation to them, and they're well aware of it.
Thank you, Chief. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Councilman Salvatore, are you satisfied at this time?
Yes, I am. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Vice Chair, Councilwoman Ryan, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess I have a couple of comments, but I guess what I'd like to do is start with a question on, has the cash flow position been reviewed by our internal auditor? Basically, I'm asking on, we heard our treasurer say that, he believes we should be only borrowing what we need to borrow. I agree with him on that. My question is has our auditor reviewed the cash flow projections to get us through July? And for the record, could she kindly state what dollar amount is needed, even if it is a reserve or a buffer, if you will, what that amount will be?
Madam
Mr. Chair, may I?
Actually, the question was to the auditor. Larry, you can certainly follow up.
Okay, 1 second. I think we have a little technical difficulty. Vice Chair, 1 second. I think we, Auditor?
Or the treasurer can answer.
The treasurer?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Well, before I answer that question, I do have a question for the CFO because he contradicted what was in the cash flow. Larry, how much did you say you expected for tax revenue in July?
I don't have it completely in front of me. I thought we had indicated that it'd be somewhere between 60 and 80 million.
Quite honestly, if we collect that much in taxes, we will not need to borrow.
I agree. But I don't know if it'll be softened by the pandemic hardship. So while I'm relying on the fourth quarter, bear in mind, Madam Auditor, when I prepared the 18-month cash flow, there was a specific purpose in mind. It was meant to provide a reasonable approach to what the maximum cash flow deficit could look like if we were attempting to make the pension payment in full. I would submit to you, Mr. Chairman, Madam Auditor, Mr. Treasurer, Madam Leader, that would be changed now if that is not what our provision would be, and it would be modified by better collections in the fourth quarter, including as we close out the month of June, and more accurate and more timely accurate information that wasn't available to us 1 month ago.
I would appreciate an update. I don't want to make a comment on that, Ms. Majority Leader. I'd rather wait until I got the updated one.
Thank
That's
you.
fair.
I think that's an important question that we need to all have confidence in. So, the question of need needs to be, clearly expressed so that we can figure out what amount we should be talking about.
Yeah, if I may, Madam Leader, if I can just be clear, I think I'm referring to what would be collected in the quarter, generally between 80 and 100 million. We don't ever collect more than between 30 and 35% of the entire levy in the first quarter. We collect more because of all the reasons why people pay in the first quarter. On a $333 million levy, 1/3 of that would be more likely about 100 million, 100. So what I was saying was when we prepared that 18-month cash flow, we thought with some intention that there would be a softer July collection with a higher August collection. While that could pivot the other way back and say July will be fine, it was intended to support the need to look at the deepest cash flow, if it were, in support of a line of credit that would have carried the full payment of the pension. That certainly can and will be modified accordingly without that consideration in mind.
Okay, and just a clarification, Larry, I think you said 80 million just for July. That was my.
Okay. I meant the first quarter. The first quarter, because the first quarter would generally. Thank you. I appreciate that.
I still would like to see an updated with the more actuals now. Because as of right now, I am only seeing like a $6 million problem. But that's only for July.
We submitted the cash flow to the auditor on Monday. It was the May cash flow with 1 month to go with projection. The closer you get to year end, as the treasurer and the auditor will tell you, the less likelihood of guess, if you will, or projection, because you only have 1 month to go, and you know the certainty of those things that must be paid against the certainty of your 11th month cash balance. So with that said, the certainty of that is that we think we'll be at about 10 million in cash availability without making the appropriation to the school department. And for the record, Madam Leader, Mr. Chairman, I had discussed that with you in other advisories, and I want to say for the record that I have in fact notified the school district based on a prior discussion that in all likelihood, as we close out the month of June, that occurrence may well happen, that they will not see their appropriation by June 30. It may be delayed into July in that regard. And I was fair in that regard, and I did include the treasurer and the internal auditor in that correspondence so that there was at least awareness that it wasn't a surprise to them. That happens to be in support of a prior discussion that was held a week ago as well. So,
thank you, Mr. Mancini. Madam Vice Chair, you have the mic.
Thank you, and thank you very much, Madam Internal Auditor. I appreciate you jumping in on that. As you know, I've been concerned about the cash flow since early May. And I have been thinking that the cash flow projections have been conservative. I just would like to say, I do think that, we do need to borrow a line of credit. I think it's a prudent thing to do because there are too many unknowns. I do think the amount is a big issue, and we need to be careful. And that's kind of why I'm asking the auditor to get involved and make sure that we can true up those numbers, have a better projection, and make sure that we're making a wise decision to borrow. And then my other questions are relative to the mechanics. Our council president had asked a question, and I think where she was going with that, and I may be wrong, but I think what she was asking, obviously the administration is looking to borrow somewhere below 94 million is what I heard. There were a few numbers thrown around, and I think that the council president's line of questioning was basically about if we borrow a small amount now, 25,000, and then in a few months we recognize we need more money, and then we go out and borrow again. What is the cost of doing that? So therefore the question is it prudent to have a larger than we need borrowing offering as opposed to a smaller one? And that was the mechanics that in the discussion which emerged that we indeed have to pay a fee on the amount that we do not draw down. So that would preclude the discussion of borrowing more than you really need. So I'm in the camp of figuring out what our cash flow is, getting a better idea of those numbers. And I do think we need to borrow. I don't think that we should borrow much more than we need. And that's why I'm so interested in cash flow. That's pretty much all I have to say.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair.
Thank
Mr.
you.
Cree? Mr. Cree, are you on the line, sir? Mr. Cree, are you on the line?
Yes, sir, I am.
Now, your position is, can you just refresh my recollection, your title is?
Yes, I'm a director at Hilltop Securities, a financial advisor to the city.
Have you done a white paper or an analysis of what should be the, not necessarily how much, what's the max amount the city, well, I guess, have you done an analysis what's the maximum amount the city could borrow in this scenario? And then the question is, do you have to put together a rationale to substantiate to borrow that money? Like, do you put those kind of reports together, sir? And I may not be, excuse my ignorance, I may not be asking for I may not have the right title, the right definition of the kind of reports, because I know in financial world, there's different lingo, and I may not know it all, and what happens is that if I don't say the right lingo, it doesn't ring the right bell, which then doesn't give us the answer, because, oh, I didn't ask that question, I didn't understand that. So do you have some kind of, I'm dovetailing on Vice Chair's question, which is the rationale and the supporting data to take out a line of credit, and do you do an analysis of something like that? Can you help me with that?
Yes, Mr. Chair, let me say two things, which I think get at what you're asking. The first thing is sort of general, and that is that, as Ms. Grandy can provide more detail on, the tax code does limit how much you can borrow on a tax-exempt basis, because obviously the federal government does not want the city to overborrow and get a tax advantage on money you do not need. So there is that overarching test, which is actually a tax test. Secondly...
Right, so one second, so stop there. So you just said the tax test, and it's based on to make sure the city doesn't overborrow, correct?
Yeah, Adam, would you like me to jump in here, Mr. Chairman,
yes,
if I
please,
may?
for more detail.
Mr. Chairman, is that all right?
Yes, Madam Grandy, Ms. Grandy.
Yeah, so as Mr. Cray was indicating, that the federal government really does not like tax exempt bonds and notes very much, because it represents a revenue loss to the federal government, because the investors who buy them are not paying income taxes. And so the federal government and the Internal Revenue Code put a limit on the amount that you can borrow for cash flow purposes on a tax exempt basis. And that is how we came up with that $94 million number. You basically take the month where you are at your lowest level, where you have the least amount of funds available, and you add to that the 5% working capital reserve, which is permitted by the code. And Mr. Mancini articulated it earlier that that 5% working capital reserve is, in your case, $25 million, and we added that to the amount that you expected to be in terms of your low fund balance. And that is the maximum amount that the federal government would permit you to issue on a tax exempt basis. They would say you don't need anything more than that, but they would say in order to have that working capital reserve, they view $25 million in your case to be a reasonable working capital reserve, and so they let you borrow that.
So, Ms. Grandy, is there any reports or any kind of reports that are generated, besides the conversation and the advocacy to borrow, right? We should borrow because of these things, et cetera, by administration, and folks that are hired by the administration. Is there reports generated that substantiate the rationale why we should borrow and why we should borrow that much? I understand that what happens is it seems there's a financial test, a tax test. What's the breaking point that a city or town, and what's the max they could take out? But the question is there reports, anything generated internally, whether it's the city government or these advisors, where they say, what really, we have to support the data. Why should the city do this? And why should it be X amount or Y amount or Z amount?
Okay, so for that, I'm going to pass it back to Mr. Cray, because that's more of a financial advisor question.
Right, there you go. So, Mr. Cray, do you have those kinds of reports? That's what I'm asking. Ms. Graney, thank you for your statement. Mr. Cray, do you understand? Is my question, is it broad enough, or specific enough, or understandable enough? Can you help me out?
No. Yeah, no, Mr. Chair.
I saw this in a movie. Treat me like I'm a fifth grader or a golden retriever, right? Right? It was great, right? So what I'm trying to get out is this. We're just average folks here in downtown Providence, and we're trying to understand, why should I give you money? Like, when you were a young kid, you go, Mom, Dad, can I have some money this afternoon? And they go, why do you want this money? Didn't I give you money yesterday? And then you do the whole, my father used to say, the song and dance of why you should get the money. So what I'm trying to understand is, can you give me, I don't want necessarily the song and dance, I want more the substantial and rational, reasonable reasons why, why should we even entertain this? And then what really should be, what should we be looking at? Okay, does that make sense?
Yes, no, Mr. Chair, I do understand what you're getting at. Unfortunately, I think with tax anticipation notes, more than straight bonds for capital improvement projects, tax anticipation notes are basically issued based on projections of what the cash flow need is projected to be. Therefore, while I don't have something prepared that provides guidelines, because it is very much based on an individual community's projections and the risk, their risk tolerance for how close are you willing to cut it. I can say that we do provide projections at a certain point in the process. And what I mean by that is, you and the vice chair asked a really good question. And part of what you're getting at is balancing, making sure you have the authority to borrow enough that you don't fall short, and weighing that against not having the authority to borrow so much that you're paying an undrawn fee on amounts that you're never going to use.
Yes.
And that's an obvious concern. I completely understand that. So what we can do is, while unfortunately, I apologize, there's no rule of thumb or guideline that I can give you at this point. What I can say is, and what we're more than happy to do is as we get to a point in the process where the council and the treasurer and the administration feel that the cash need may be between X and Y, with the help of Treasurer Lombardi and the banking relationship, we can get indications of the various fees from the bank, and we can do an analysis comparing, this undrawn fee based on this amount as compared to this amount, to show you, so that you can help weigh the comfort of having a little extra in the bank versus how much that's going to cost. Is that helpful, Mr. Chair?
I think it is, and I probably will have further additional questions, because after all, I am a golden retriever. So, it's the idea, understanding it. I'm sorry, but I want to get a little deeper into that question. I thought it was important to do that. So, Madam Chair, are you all set? Can I go on to the next?
And
Of course.
He answered my question,
Yes,
and I want to say thank you very much. I've been trying to get my arms around a good number for cash flow projections. That's the basis of the borrowing. And we really do need some guidance and a white paper, if you will, analysis on what makes the most sense for us, given our best expectations or projections on our cash flow. So thank you very much. I greatly appreciate your response. And that answers the question perfectly for me.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. And just get a sense, view it like if we were in a private company and you're trying to convince the board of directors why to do this. And whatever reports your company or companies would have to produce to provide to that board of directors to support doing some type of borrowing like this, that's what we're looking for. So I think that's the best way I can put it right now until I think of a better analogy. Next, we have internal auditor. Do you have further questions, or can I go to the next person?
No, Mr. Chair, I got my question. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilman Espinal, sir?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I love that analogy of the golden retriever. That's a great one. Okay, so we all understand that this is based on projection, and it's based on getting the levy passed and sending out the July bill and having that money come in. But there's also another source of revenue that I don't know if Mr. Mancini took that into consideration, which is the tax sale in August. So would that has that been taken into consideration? And if not, would that have an impact? And what is the projected amount for us to expect from that sale?
So, Councilman Espinal, if I may say, Mr. Mancini, I know you, I'm glad you asked that question. Mancini, I know that you folks postponed the tax sale. Can you also explain when that tax sale will happen, and then, of course, continue answering Councilman Espinal's question?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and to Councilman Espinal's question. The tax sale has been continued to August 26th. And that takes in under two considerations. The fact that it happens before August 31st allows that revenue, whatever that dollar amount is. Currently, it's projected to be approximately $2 million. And the reason why it's $2 million, it was approximately expected to bring in $2.5 million had it been held on May 14th. At that time, it was continued. From May 14th to even through today, people continued to pay their back taxes, their current taxes, which will become back taxes, I should say. So that portfolio of tax sale properties has shrunk further. It has been received. It's measured in the current cash flow. But to give the answer directly to Councilman Espinal, probably about $2 million, maybe a little more, is expected to be generated in the tax sale held on August 26th. Because it happens within the first 60 days of the new fiscal year, what was expected to be measured as a current tax collection had it been collected in May and would have helped with the levy budgeted for the current taxes. We can't use it for the current taxes, so it falls to what's called a back tax. Under accounting rules and under the rules employed by the city of Providence that we have in our accounting rules, any tax collected in the first 60 days of the new year can be considered a back tax, and it's included in our budget for purposes of measuring surplus or deficit. So it'll help in two ways. It'll supply cash, as was projected that it would supply cash, and it will help continue the city's operating position, hopefully arriving us at a balanced budget and not a deficit. That cash, Councilman Espinal, was in fact reflected in the expectation of the tax sale being postponed. I don't want to say canceled, postponed. So it has already been factored in.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you.
Councilman Espinal,
I'm all set, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Councilman Taylor, Chief Taylor.
Yes, thank you, Jim. So again, two things. One is, I don't know. I know I heard the CFO say we're going to take it month by month, and for the see how we're going along. And I'm hearing that if we take out money, obviously we're going to pay a fee. If we say we're going to take out 30 million, but we only take 10 million, we're still going to pay a fee on the 20 million that we didn't take out. My question is why, since we have the 10.5 million in the rainy day fund, that we couldn't use that and see how the first month, see if we can use that. Like the state is using their rainy day fund. Why couldn't we use it and then pay it back with no fees? That's one. Second thing, let me jump to two. Well, Go ahead. Go with one.
Councilman
No,
Mancini?
no, go.
No, Mr. Mancini,
I'll
let us
answer that.
why don't you answer that first question, please?
Certainly. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, Councilman Taylor, we could, bear in mind when the cash flow process began to develop into line of credit consideration, we had expected not to use the cash, the funds that are in the rainy day fund. If under extreme conditions we were required to do so, there is no prohibition against us doing that other than by the appropriate resolution, I believe, that'd be required under the city council ordinances and charter. And if we must, we will. While we would prefer not to, as a means of fiscal discipline, when you're faced between fiscal discipline and the priority of extreme conditions, I presume that answer will be self-answered, but we won't exclude it from consideration. We just didn't want to bring the cupboard bare when there was other opportunities, including with an expense associated with the cost of borrowing. So currently we're weighing both of those options.
But if we use the 10.5 million, say we're going to use it, and then say July or August, we realize that we're going to need more money, then we could go back and look at borrowing. So I don't know why we wouldn't, why wouldn't we do that first?
When the original thought of line of credit financing came about, bear in mind it was sometime in early April or mid-April, with expectations that we would have may not have to have a line of credit in place before the fiscal year was over, and that there would be consideration for perhaps 2 lines of credit. One that would be established in fiscal year 20 with the need to draw again. We were looking at dark conditions associated with pandemic that closed government here in Providence on March 13th. And as more and more dramatic conditions are taking place and more business activity was being canceled or put off, we didn't have that crystal ball. None of us did. So with that said, in that particular time frame and that mindset, who knew that we thought we would need cash flow to arrive? We thought their taxes would be off by 10 million. Today, I'm proud to say they're only off by 4 million and would have only been off by 2 million had the tax sale been completed. Those were conditions associated with good collection practices, taxpayer behavior, and people honoring their tax responsibility. But because we didn't know that, we thought we might need a line of credit in this fiscal year, and that line of credit could then give us the comfort we need to clear the year. And there would be a second line of credit, we thought, that could happen in the new year that would have extinguished the first line of credit, that dollar amount of that drawing, and then continue with a new one, giving us 12 months to pay both of them. Ms. Grandy advised at one point, the way it works is it's a 2-pronged test. And Ms. Grandy, if I may say so, Mr. Chairman, let me explain, and Ms. Grandy, if she can jump in if I don't have this correct. Let's back up to what a TAN is, a tax anticipation note. From its legal construction, a tax anticipation note is predicated on no greater than 80% of the uncollected tax levy. So, in the fourth quarter, there was approximately $62 million of taxes expected to be collected in the fourth quarter, remaining on the full levy. At that juncture, 80% of that uncollected amount would have been $48 million, and then throw in the reserve, if the reserve could be added, another $25 million. We could have probably, if needed, borrowed upwards of $60-some million before the year was over. As the time clicked off the calendar, and as the tax bills were being received in the month of April, this was a discussion that was held at the end of March, early April, as the calendar folded and the tax collection for the fourth quarter ensued, and more taxes were being collected. As we arrived in May, it became obvious to the finance department and shared with council that 80% of what's remaining will give you virtually nothing. If there was only $8 million at one time remaining in the uncollected fourth quarter tax collection, 80% of $8 million would be $5 million approximately, 4.6 million, 4.8 million. Add the 25, I don't even think you do it, maybe you could do the 25 million, on a tax exempt basis. There wouldn't be that sufficiency of cash flow available now that you now that you collected all of your fourth quarter taxes, with the exception of 5 or 8 million. Hence the reason why we went to one line of credit and not until the new year, because now theoretically the new year levy, once adopted or in motion, 330 million 80% of that, because it's not yet collected, it's uncollected, would have been as high as a couple of $100 million. That would have been your legal limit. That's your legal limit. But if you're going to do it with market pricing under a tax-exempt basis, you heard both Mr. Cray and Ms. Grandy explain how that works. You take your deepest projected deficit position, and by the way, that deepest deficit projection position is styled with various pivots that are called for by the preparer of the cash flow. In my case, the finance department. Because why? We could say we don't know if pilot's going to come in July like it did. It might come in August. That's a reasonable assumption. So remove $33 million from your cash. We don't know if taxpayer behavior will continue with some slow or lag payment, but still will pay. Maybe they won't pay it all in July, but they'll pay it in August or September. So focusing on July only, there's a reduction of what could be received in taxes. Oh, and by the way, we got to still pay off the remainder of the fiscal 20 pension. And if we chose to make the full payment, when you add all that together, that brought us to the deepest cash flow of the year in the month of July. Add in the 5% reserve. That's how that $94 million number was arrived at. It's not predicated on imminent need or definitive need. It was based on strategic deployment of resources predicated on how a cash flow is used as the basis and premise for a TAN borrowing. And with that, because we thought we would make that pension payment in full, that was included. If the discussion has now been properly vetted that may not occur and will not occur, and I am in support of your conversation, on that notion alone, we thought we would be as deep as 80 million with that full contribution paid, which was 69 million. Therefore, it's not 80 million. It could be as low as 10 million, and then throw in your 5% reserve, which is 25 million. That's how you get to like 30, 35 million. I'm discussing with the committee, Councilman, the various options, and I use the word pivot, how you can tact and turn to make your cash flow properly presented, but predicated on different assumptions. To the chairman's point, the white paper, what assumptions were used? When Mr. Cray and Ms. Grandy were working on the premise of preparing the resolution, it was based on those presumptions. If they change, and I hear loud and clear that they will be changing, because we're not going to contemplate a market timing occurrence with one single payment under any condition. With that said, then there needs to be a repivoting of how the deepest cash flow will be. I would submit to all of you that probably be no worse than 10 or 12 million, and then throw in your 5% reserve, getting you back to a reasonable consideration of 35 million, perhaps, maybe less.
If we didn't pay the pension, how much would we need?
Well, we looked at that July as the deepest month, and we thought we would be close to 82 million short. And then you add in the 5%, 72 million. I think we would be at that prepay in of itself was 70 million. So you would be reducing your request from 94 to 24 million. Okay. But don't forget, we have made some early payments in prior years, as much as 10 million a month in the month of July and August and September, maybe 30 million in the first quarter, because the treasurer and I and the internal auditor have for the past 3 or 4 years seen the wisdom in making as large of earlier payments as we can, because we are saving the assumed rate of return. We are saving that 8% interest charge. No doubt about that. That cannot be disputed. Not to have that imbued with market timing of deposits. We're talking about the assumed rate of return that's already built into our amortization schedule that we have not changed. That's at 8%. Any payment less than June 30 saves 8 cents on the dollar when paid. So we've been making 10, 20, 30 million by the time we get to the second quarter of the year, because we had the cash and we thought that was a prudent use of it, and it was. Here's an example. We're going to save probably 2.4 million already this year. I think we already asked the Siegel, what's the payoff going to be at June 30, and then what is it every day after June 30 if we don't make it by June 30? It's going to be like in the $30 million range, which would save us somewhere around 2.5 million because of those early payments that we did do in July and August. While not in full, we did do them. So the pivot of this, the strategic deployment of our resources and our policy decision and our collaboration between administration and council will now next determine what's the right number. And I would say to you, minimally, for both the right number And now for the comfort of having a line of credit in place, probably no less than 30 million to have the comfort in place. Still doesn't mean we're going to draw one penny. Still doesn't mean that. It just means to have that in place.
Okay, so like again, my stance would be if we have the rainy day fund, I think we should use the rainy day fund first and then see where we go from there if we need to take a line of credit maybe a month or two down the road. In addition, what upsets me the most is my second year on the finance committee. Last year, we had the big tax increase and we came up with the homestead, and it was a big battle back and forth of what it was going to be, what are we going to have the tax at and everything. And we had people come in, and I totally remember it the best. I can't say his last name. I call him Mr. Combs from the Providence Water Supply Board, who was a board member. And he mentioned in there that what he thought that the city of Providence needs to do, and I know we didn't do it because we wouldn't even be talking about it now, is to list all the assets of the buildings and property that they own and look at such things as Camp Cronin, see how much it's worth, see if we could rent it out as a solar panel place or do something. In fact, that last year's budget I brought up and it was taken out, that we were going to put $750,000 into it. So I'm glad we took that out of there. But we have not, as the years gone by, we have no clue what assets the city of Providence has and what we could get rid of. If I'm a businessman and I have a bunch of houses and I can't afford to pay all the houses, I'm going to look at some of the houses to sell instead of taking out a line of credit to pay off the bills. So I think we should look into Camp Cronin and look at our assets, like Mr. Combs said a year ago. And I wish we would have had it, but we didn't. And we're just kicking the can down the road because Camp Cronin might be worth a lot of money. And the interest is so low now, people might buy it and we can get rid of it and get it off because I know we're paying for it somehow. And or rent it out. I know he mentioned about, rent it because of solar panels or something. But a year's gone by and we're playing Monopoly, if you want to call it. We're moving our things all over the place. We don't have any thing. We have no idea what assets we have. I know we have the Providence Water Supply Board up there. That's being used per se, but I don't agree on borrowing money because we're going to keep borrow. We're going to borrow this year. Then next year comes, we're going to want to borrow again, and then the mayor's term's over and half the council's over. And if I decide to run again, that's going to be an issue that I'm going to have to deal with. And we can't borrow our way out of this. We need to really look at what we own and look at Camp Cronin and businesses like whatever buildings that we have. And we need to go back to the drawing table, like I said, and also get these tax exempts. The city cannot run on 40% of taxes because as I see us borrowing money now, I can guarantee you're coming back in September, October, November, or sometime in there and say, we need a supplement budget. We're going to raise taxes. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman Chief Taylor. I have a few follow-up questions. That's right, with the committee council members. One, I'd like to just follow up. I'd like to understand the borrowing process. We're using different terms like TAN and line of credit and stuff like that. My question is, let's make it a simple number. Let's say it's $20 million. The city takes out, gets the $20 million, takes out $5 million, right? Then a month later pays back that $5 million, right? Then 12 months goes by. We haven't taken out any more money. Does the $20 million with the line of credit still exist post 12 months? Ms. Grandy? No. So tell me how, Ms. Grandy, you're muted. You muted yourself.
Sorry about that.
Can you tell me and does that last forever, or you pay you take out $5 million, and is there a time frame when you have to pay? Because the term was saying that you have to pay back a year after you draw down. So my mind is you don't draw down at all for the entire year, and next year they start not this fiscal year coming up, the next one, They draw down. So this way, it's a continuing rolling line of credit for the years to come. Can you help me with this?
Yeah. So in your case, you're not allowed to do that because we are calling it a tax anticipation note. The tax anticipation note would be issued in this case in the form of a line of credit. In the past, when the city has issued tax anticipation notes, they've been fixed rate notes. Under the charter, you're only authorized to issue a tax anticipation note for 1 year. You can issue a new one the following year, but they're considered to be short-term obligations. And so it's not from the date of the initial draw, it's from the date that the note is issued, which
Okay, so
coincidentally usually is the same day, but it's really a 1-year obligation.
So it's based on the date of issuance, not the date of drawing the money out.
Correct.
Because that was said on the record, and I want to make sure I understood. I want to make sure I didn't misconstrue. The next question. One second. Next question is, so let's say we do this, right? We issue 20 million to TAN. A year rolls around, right? The year's not done yet. The fiscal year is not completed. Can we issue another TAN for the upcoming fiscal year at the same time where we have an outstanding TAN in the present fiscal year?
Yes, because you're
right now
issuing it in anticipation of a different fiscal year.
So we could possibly be, so there's a potential we could be in that cycle, which means, we roll through the year, the fiscal year, because right now we're talking about issuing a TAN for the upcoming next fiscal year, right? So next year rolls around. Let's talk. We're going to hope for the best, but prepare for the worst, right? So we realize that the next fiscal year is just as problematic, probably even more, by the way, and most likely will be. We're right now in an artificial bubble right now. I mean, in 4 to 5 months from now, that's when people will know what the true economic fallout. I mean, the average person right now, they're just not seeing it. They're not getting their eviction notices. They're not getting their foreclosure notices. They're not getting their turn-off sale, utility notices. All those things aren't happening right now. They're not getting their credit cards revoked. All that stuff, right? So you roll around. So now all of a sudden we're kind of caught in this cycle where we took out the TAN for this fiscal year. Let's pretend we're in the next fiscal year, right? And then go, okay, it's just as bad. So now we have no choice. Now we get ourselves caught in that cycle because now no problem, we'll just take another TAN and we'll be fine. And then we don't do any austerity measures. I guess it's fair that we don't do enough austerity measures so we can lessen that potential cycle. That's a potential cycle that could happen. Because what's going on right now, no one knows. The uncertainty is so great and so volatile for the next 24 months, the next 36 months. I think greater than it has been in probably since the Great Depression, post-Great Depression, far greater. And I'm just, unemployment is 25%. I mean, what did we lose? 35% of the GDP last month? I mean, it's just rolling. The news just keeps rolling in, right? So I think what it is that what I'm looking at is it's almost like what we do today will have an impact. And I agree that we have to probably do something. I just think that we have to make sure whatever we do, don't make it worse for ourselves. The next 36 months. My last budget of this term, okay, I don't want to see it what it was like the last budget, the previous terms, the terms before, and all that kind of stuff where the council and folks and whoever's sitting in the mayor's seat was doing a politically expedient budget, not a financially responsible budget on the way out. You know what I'm saying? I just think that we have a greater duty and a higher obligation. At least I feel that way, and I know I'm sure my colleagues do too, especially the ones that won't be there the next term. We want to make sure that we are in a better position. So that's my concern, and I think that's a real concern. So that's a possibility that could happen, right? We could end up getting just snowballing on us, potentially, right? Ms. Graham?
Well, with good financial planning, it's to be avoided. I mean, lots of communities have issued TANs in the past, although I acknowledge this is as we keep saying, unique financial situation. But the goal is to have it be temporary.
Yeah, but I would just look for, especially for Mr. Cray, a deeper dive and a deeper understanding, of course, from you, Ms. Grandy, just so we have the best you folks can do. And if we also can hire additional advisors that you guys can suggest to help us with this quandary, because I think it's important. I just think we should make sure we have the best information, the best evidence possible that we can have at least today. I know it's difficult. Mr. Mancini eloquently put it forward. He explained the trepidation, the issues facing us, and
Thank you.
I respect that and I recognize that with him. So I just want to make sure that at least when we are explaining to our constituents, to the taxpayers, to the business owners, that we've done even a deeper dive this go around versus, the usual, that's all. So I'm looking for that. So that's the first thing. Another follow-up question I want to know was, you mentioned about resolution and ordinance. One thing I am concerned about is that, as we all know, unfortunately, just even recently, the past couple of days, a resolution has no authority. It means really nothing. It has no power of law. I understand for borrowing purposes, it's fine because it's a statement of the body. But it has all the mechanisms in it, talking about, iterating what controls and stuff in it. It has no power. Unless it's in an ordinance form, this resolution, at least for the accounting and control mechanisms to make sure there's proper oversight by the council and for the council and by the treasurer for the term of this can, this resolution isn't worth anything for our purposes than the paper it's printed on. So I would strongly ask that if we are going to go down this road, we need to submit something probably off the docket, the next finance meeting, next council meeting, which is tomorrow, at least put this in an ordinance form. And then send to the finance committee. So this way we can move forward that way, because that is important. The people need to know that the oversight and the accounting and controlling mechanisms of this document is grounded in actual law, not simply in a statement of the body. So that's one thing I would ask my council colleagues and committee members, and I think administration, I think we need to do that ASAP. This is mine. I'd ask my committee members to join in on that issue. Do you agree with that, at least that aspect?
Absolutely.
Vice Chair?
Absolutely. I think that's prudent. I think that was referenced by our treasurer as well.
Yeah. So I think that's really important. Councilman Taylor, do you want to talk on that specific issue then, Mr. Mancini?
No, I just have one follow-up from what I just went and looked. We're paying $12,000 a year for taxes to Narragansett for Camp Cronin. So multiply that times 10 years, that's 1.2 million we're wasting.
There you go.
No, I think that's 120,000.
That's
I think 12,000.
You are correct. I did more than 10 years because it's been vacant for like 40 years. So,
Mr. Mancini, did you want to?
Mr. Chairman, I am in full support of an ordinance. I have been from the beginning. I want to be clear about that it was because of at the time sensitivity of single passage to get it established. With that said, Mr. Chairman, I'm happy to work with the internal auditor and the treasurer to do just that, to transfer this information in ordinance form with the help of Ms. Grandy and the clerk's office. And with that said, if you're asking that it be ready to be put on off docket so that it can be referred to the next finance committee meeting, happy to do that. I just don't know if you're asking us to do it just as it stands today with the maximum ceiling there, bearing in mind that I don't think anyone today or tonight is intending on going anywhere near that maximum. So do you wish to have that reflected differently? And does the body have an opinion on that to lower that maximum ceiling? And I just want to, now that we've heard some news tonight about fees, the undrawn amount would incur fees. I'm in concert with your concerns, and maybe Mr. Cray can guide us all tomorrow in a discussion on that.
So I would, of course, first of all, I defer to the Madam President, if it's okay that we could even take an item off the docket tomorrow night. So that's the first thing. Madam President, would that be okay?
Yeah, we could take the item tomorrow off docket.
That's the first thing. So, and I guess the second thing is, I guess to expedite, at least to take it off the docket tomorrow, I rely on, of course, the administration, Internal and Treasurer, and Mr. Almonte. However you want to put the form, even if you had the same information and put it in ordinance form, we can amend it in committee accordingly. But I'll defer to the Treasurer and the Internal Order right now. I don't know if we need to get caught up. I don't want to, because we haven't figured out exactly what we're talking about, how much money, what we're willing to borrow, not borrow. I would just simply say that you can at least convert this into a resolution form or make whatever minor tweaks. Treasurer, did you say you want to weigh in, sir?
Mr. Chairman, I thought I saw an ordinance out there. Wasn't there an ordinance provided to us?
I do know.
I have a resolution.
No, there was an ordinance.
Mr. Chair, may I?
Mr. Mancini?
Yes, the treasurer is accurate about an ordinance that accompanied this, but it was an ordinance that you, sir, and members of the committee had asked that no borrowing would take place unless there was an accompanying debt issuance policy of the city. So Ms. Grandy, to her credit, spent a considerable amount of time of developing a debt issuance policy, all the rules that we would subscribe to and abide by on how we would borrow any matter, bonds, TANs, etc. And while that's meant for your consideration, that's a very much deeper discussion, if you will, and it should be taken up. But we were trying to accommodate the request of the council when they said no borrowing unless there's a debt issuance policy, and we did do that, and that's the ordinance that the treasurer, I believe, is referring to, but it wasn't an ordinance for the resolution language.
Madam Clerk, was that submitted?
I would have to look at.
So I would just suggest, just for sake for tomorrow night, and of course I show deference to Madam President, that whether if that's ordinance ready or not ready, but at least this resolution will be put into ordinance form, and then both can be submitted off the docket tomorrow night, and then we can start rolling with it. Madam President, of course, I defer to you. Is that okay? What do you think?
That makes sense. We can take the items off docket and send it to committee.
Thank you, Madam President. And then I just have just another follow-up, because I am feeling a little late. Not that we haven't had many hours later meetings, and unfortunately, that no one's picked up on the months of multiple hour meetings we've had this committee. And I want to thank the committee members and council members for participating. I just wanted to make sure that. And I don't want to get caught up in who said, she said, but the cash flow issue has always been this issue, this constant conversation about cash flow. Do we know what it is? We're not sure what it is. I'm talking about for everybody involved. And I just want to make sure that if we are going to be having this, I look at the statements of Exhibit A about, cash balances and cash flows and stuff like that. It seems to me that one of the things I hear a lot is that we don't necessarily receive, and people correct me if I'm wrong, a cash flow in a timely manner or the most updated one. My take is if we're not, and that's not happening, then I would suggest that has to happen, and we have to work out whatever those kinks are, especially now if we've been considering any kind of money to be taken out. That has been an issue I've heard over a few years. So I would just say that has to be resolved. I don't want to get into debate. I just ask that all the parties could agree that we resolve whatever that is, that issue. If it's not an issue, great. I just don't like hearing when someone says, "Oh, I can't get it. I don't have the most updated one." It just further seems to hamper the process sometimes. So I would just ask that has to be resolved if it's an issue. Okay. So that's it for me right now. Other committee members, do you have any other questions at this time? Vice Chair.
Once we have the handle on the cash flow, I do think it's important that Mr. Cray put together a financial borrowing plan for us, given the unique state of our city at this time. So
Mr. Cray, can you get that done sooner than later per the Vice Chair's request, Mr. Craig?
Yes, we'll absolutely work with the cash flow to provide you projections and possible plans.
Perfect.
So just letting me, Thank you, Vice Chair. Just like Mr. Craig, just so everyone understands, just for timing purposes, the goal would be that, per the deference, of course, to Madam President, that we take these items off the docket tomorrow night in the council meeting, would then go to Finance Committee, and we'll take them up sometime next week. So I would ask that the reports and deliverables we're talking about, Mr. Craig, et cetera, we need to expedite that so everybody can be truly, fully informed, all right, at that time. And I just have one, is that okay, Mr. Craig? Will you be able to accommodate that request, sir?
Yes, understood.
Thank you, Mr. Craig. Ms. Grandy, and I don't know if it's really for you or for Mr. Craig, Mr. Mancini, for timing purposes themselves, because of the uncertainty with the state budget, and it looks like they're going to go deep into July, potentially. For our purposes, we're probably going to go into that, not maybe as deep, but probably going to be right around that timetable. Question I have is, if we do agree to issue a TAN or whatever financial mechanism, something like a TAN this time, issue, what is the timing on that? Do we have to issue it just before the next fiscal year, or? I mean, because clearly this fiscal year is expiring this month, and we're not going to have this ready. So, if we end up, we finally get the budget passed, the levy is going to be passed out of, God willing, be passed out of the Finance Committee next Monday, right? Then subsequently that, we're going to hopefully then iron out our budget problems and the spending plan. But as Mr. Mancini testified, we'll get the levy out, get the tax bills out, and then, at least for spending purposes, we're going to be fine, because no one's going to be doing any, although it reverts back to the previous spending plan, there's not going to be any crazy spending. There's not going to be any crazy hiring stuff going on, right? So then, we're going to then pass the spending plan. The TAN itself, if we end up passing it right around that same time, because that seems like that's maybe where we're going to have to do it, is that okay?
It is. I mean, as I think was mentioned earlier in the conversation, it's probably going to take a couple of weeks to get a bank lined up. And then once you have the bank and their counsel lined up, it takes, on an expedited basis, it takes about 2 weeks to get the documentation drafted, signed, sealed, and delivered. So that's really the timing that you want to keep your eye on, is when you need the cash, and to try to make sure that you have enough lead time to find a lender, negotiate your deal, and then paper it.
So now I'm going to dovetail on what Councilman Taylor mentioned. So Mr. Mancini, for managing the budget, for budgetary purposes, we know we have about $10.5 million in the rainy day account. If, as we know, that let's say we pass the TAN with the budget late July, mid-July, whatever the number is, right? Clearly, it's going to take a good month or so to get the TAN process going. So that's going to probably get you into potentially deep August, maybe, or September, for that money to be available. Will you be having the rainy day account? You'll be able to at least keep things going enough for that month or so, and then knowing the TAN, if we get, let's assume we're going to issue a TAN, or whatever that number is, right? And know that TAN's there. So then, would we then take that money out and replenish the rainy day account, and then utilize the rest as we go along?
Yes.
So we use it as a temporary loan, like a bridge loan. We use the rainy day account as a...
So, Mr. Chairman, could I just give me 5 minutes to provide commentary, and I hope give comfort to every member of the council?
I'll give you 3 minutes. No, you got it.
I'll have to speak quicker than I normally do. And so,
you have the mic, sir.
Thank you, sir. And we've shared a lot of good conversation this evening, and much of it is intended to be beneficial. And while some of it may have now become stale dated because of the need when it was first prepared, has now changed. And that's a good thing in many ways. It really is a good thing. It's the proper reflection. What I do know is that the latest cash flow projection that was timely filed on Monday with the internal auditor projects that we will be close to 10.8 million of cash availability at the end of June without making the school appropriation. I'm openly disclosing that, and I have already written to the school district explaining that, and they were already aware of that in a conversation a week prior. So that I did do the respectful thing, despite the fact that there was an intervention, and they are in fact not under our jurisdiction. With that said, my cash flow needs in the month of July are 2 payrolls, approximately $10 million for both of them, $1.2 million in debt service, and the city's share of medical in the early part of the year, about $1 million a week, because it's drawn down by claims. That's $4 million. I would put it at close to $16 million. And going into the July fiscal year beginning with a balance of, let's say, $10 million. That leaves me $6 million difference shy. I was hopeful then, as I'm hopeful now, that the tax bills will arrive in a timely fashion, even if they sit on someone's bureau on July 3rd, 4th, and 5th. Following that, cash will roll in. Bear in mind, while I might need $16 million for the month of July, here's how I need it. I need $1.2 million the second week. I need about $5 million the third week, and the remainder in weeks 3 and 4. So it's not the first day of July, but the point is, if you measure cash flow by the day, by the week, and by the month, it'll be tight. That means we'll probably not pay any other operating expenses that are not necessary, and nor will we authorize any for the new year. Do I think we could rely on the rainy day? Yes. And as I had told the treasurer in a briefing that I had with him last week, yes, we would, but we would make it a condition that it would be returned as soon as we could return it, whether it was from tax revenues in July and August, or eventually the line of credit, because I do believe that reserve should always be kept where it is, and maybe should be built upon going forward. With that, Mr. Chairman, and if I may, Madam President, if we're going to do off-docket introduction tomorrow evening, then I think it behooves us to take the necessary document, whether it's an ordinance, I believe. I'll defer to the treasurer. He may know this. And I think I asked Mr. Shiverini earlier today in a phone call. He thought I would best serve if I asked Ms. Southgate that. Whatever instrument is necessary for the council to authorize the treasurer and the finance director to draw from the rainy day fund, now that those funds are in there, you just can't withdraw them. I think it would be wise and prudent to have that instrument also introduced tomorrow evening, so that you already have all of these on a parallel track for approval, and that would be beneficial to the process when we need it. We just can't withdraw it. It's going to be withdrawn with the proper authority. I believe that can be done by resolution, Mr. Chairman, but I'm not the legal expert. I'll have that opinion tomorrow from Ms. Southgate from the Law Department. But if you can indulge me, that's what I think we should do. And then that gets us to a degree of safety net that I think we can live with, even without the line of credit yet to be put in place and yet to be determined the proper amount.
Thank you, Mr. Mancini. With that said, then I think it's even more imperative to talk about the this present fiscal year, and tightening the budget as much as possible for the summer months of July and August and September. Let's talk about that real quick. And I think one of the ways is right now, I noticed the city started utilizing the work share program.
Correct.
Right? So my question is that should we be looking at that for a second round of individuals to go on the work share program so we can utilize the benefit of the layoff money? So this way it can take some of the burden off in July and August. Because if we're going to do this, you just talked us into saying we definitely need to, in my mind, look at that work share program and look at maybe putting more folks on it. It's not going to be pretty. I understand that. But since the city chose not to utilize the layoff process for the past 3 months and having just stayed home, which we spoke earlier, and I don't want to go down that road again, and not utilize any benefit then, it seems to me that we should revisit this work share program ASAP. And if you get another 50 people, 100 people, just to ease off some of the pressure. I know that I believe the work share, the $600, it ends at the end of July. So we could get at least in the 4 or 5 weeks at least, maybe 2 pay periods of additional people on the work share. Now, I understand some services will be hurt some of the services, but I think we need to think about this because you're clearly not gonna have the tan, whatever the number is, if it does pass, available for July 1st. You're not gonna probably have it for July 31st. You may, if you're lucky, to have it available maybe mid-August. Let's play probably late August, probably September. So my take is, through your own financial analysis, I think we need to revisit that. And there are other departments now, you know, they have all their folks. We have to probably look at other departments again. And I'm not necessarily, I'm happy about it, but you know, you have to look at probably maybe, you know, because the city didn't take advantage of the layoff issues the past 3 months, you know, now we probably have to revisit the Parks Department, the DPW. You have to look at those things because we need to figure out how to ease off the pressure for August and September to make it as easy as possible. So if you have to do a bridge, I'm using the word bridge loan, it's probably not appropriate, of the rainy day account, right? We use less of it by applying additional austerity measures for the months of July, August, and September. I think you're probably better off to tighten your belt the first third, or maybe the first 2 quarters, I should say, the first 2 quarters of the upcoming budget, and then hopefully things stabilize, and maybe we can then loosen it up on the expense side. The last 2 quarters of the budget. So I'm just, I'd look to you and your administration that when we bring this up again, is that talking about what additional austerity measures we can do now, as we speak right now, this week, because we have work share, we can tap into that tomorrow. We send an additional numbers to DLT, right? Department of Labor, I believe it is, right? Training. They will accept it, and then we can get more people, you know, and save some more money. So I would look towards that. If you could get the most up-to-date work-share program to the internal order, and I'd love to hear from the administration them looking at that again and maybe adding some more folks in that number. So that's just and anything else that you can do for the upcoming, especially the first quarter of the budget, to relieve your pressure. That's just kind of my overall suggestion. All right?
Yes. Mr. Chairman.
And another example, like stop paying temps. That's another example. Maybe put the temps on a work share. I mean, we need to stop operating like it's pre-COVID, and I think that's the concern. I think that's what gives me great pause. So that's why. So if you could revisit that and then let us know when we bring this up. Well, because what we'll do is when it comes off the docket on tomorrow night, we'll bring this up again next week. You know, as soon as possible when Mr. Cray's ready, Ms. Granny's ready, and we're going to bring it up and we'll get deeper into it. Okay.
Fair enough.
And that's a promise that's a obligation I present to Madam President as well as the committee members and to you, to administration. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Right. Is there any other comments or questions assigned by committee members?
No, Mr. Chair, I'm good. And I want to thank everyone for their wonderful presentations tonight. It was very informative. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Madam Leader.
Madam President?
Yeah, I would like to thank you. I would like to take a couple minutes just to address what happened in the committee last night. I've been getting some questions about it, and I just wanted to share with all of you that we have to be mindful of the experiences that some of our colleagues have had, some of us have had when it comes to dealing with systems of power. And with that said, I don't agree with muting any council members. So I hope that we can find another way how we can express our rules of the city council without going to the step of muting someone. So I just hope that we can find another way how to do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam President. Councilwoman Anthony.
Yes, I thank you so much, Council President, for your comments. And I'm sorry I wasn't here last night at the meeting, except for in the very beginning. But I would also like to say that I think, you know, I understand, Mr. Chairman, where you were coming from in your position, and thank you very much for taking action. But I guess what I'm hearing from community of color and our other council people of color is I think people are asking us to listen and then follow their direction. And so I just, I've been thinking a lot about that because it's very difficult to sit on the side and not take action on the matters that the systemic racism that exists in this country and has for a very long time. We all have a part in it, whether it's consciously or unconscious, and we have to accept responsibility for that. But I really, really believe in my heart that it's the right thing to do is to listen to our community of color and our council people of color and let them lead and let us follow and support them in their efforts. So that's what I'd like to say. But I thank the council president for speaking on that this evening.
Thank you. All right. Any other comments or questions?
No, Mr. Chair.
All right, thank you. So then, thank you all for participating this evening. Be well, be safe. We need to do a motion to continue item number 1.
Motion to continue item number 1.
Second.
Vice Chair.
Second.
Taylor, discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Carries. We have a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Second.
Taylor, Councilwoman Castillo. Discussion? All in favor? Aye. Thank you all.